Hi everyone, Margaret here. Keeping a sourdough starter is easier than you think. Let me show you how. Over this past weekend, I did a lot of baking. I made some sourdough English muffins, some jumbo biscuits, a loaf of sandwich sourdough bread, and then a rustic loaf of sourdough bread. Now that's a lot of baking. I don't normally make that many things all on the same day or 2 days even, but we ran out of everything all at once. So when I did this big amount of baking, I had my sourdough starter in my small batter bowl. It has the markings, actually it's on this side, right on the side of the measurements, cup, 2 cup, 3 cup. And so I kept my starter in here and I had it up at the 1 cup, kind of like it is right now. And then I just spooned in another cup of flour. So you want equal amounts of starter to equal amounts of flour. And then I just pour in some filtered water and stir until it has the consistency I want. And that is a really thick pancake batter, basically, not really pourable, okay? But I'm not going to maintain that big of a starter for this week because I'm not going to need to bake multiple loaves on the same day. So when I'm just keeping my normal starter, I usually keep it in a lidded jar just like this that has a hinge. I don't want a gasket though. I don't want it to be airtight. So let me show you how I do that. Now, when I'm transferring my starter over to a jar like this that I keep on my counter on a daily basis, I usually just pour in about that much, and then I pour in about that much flour, equal parts, and then I pour the water in and mix. But sometimes when you're starting brand new, or if your starter is not acting like you want it to be, bubbly and active, happy, if it's not doing what you want it to do, you want to be a little more precise, okay? And then once you've got it dialed in, you can just eyeball it like I do. But how to be precise is using a kitchen scale. Now, when I am baking, I use a kitchen scale for all my measurements. So how you're going to want to do this is you just put your device on there. I'm sorry, my dogs will not stop barking, so I'm just going to go on with it. So I need it to be grams. So I've tiered it to 0, and I've got it on grams. And normal feeding of a starter is a ratio of 1 to 1 to 1. 1 part starter, and this is weight, by weight. 1 part starter, 1 part unbleached bread flour, or all-purpose will often work too, but make sure it's unbleached. And then 1 part filtered water. You don't want to use distilled water or water directly out of your tap. I just have a Brita pitcher, and I just pour that straight from the Brita pitcher at room temperature, and it works great. Okay, so that's all in grams. Okay, so it would be my normal bread recipe that I'm going to make next, that we'll run out of first here, takes 100 grams. So I'm going to measure in 50 grams of starter, and then I'm going to add 50 grams of flour and 50 grams of water, and that will give me my 150 grams of starter, of which I'll use 100 of it, leave 50, and then I'll be able to feed that 50, okay? Now, there's more than 50 grams of starter here, and the rest of it is going to go into my discard jar, which is going to sit in my refrigerator. And you can do all kinds of recipes with your discard. That is the sourdough starter that is not currently active, okay? It'll last in the refrigerator a very long time. You can pull it out and feed it once a week if you want to. I usually don't, and I do use it for waffles and pancakes. These biscuits are made from the discard as well. Everything else is from active starter. So I'm going to pour the rest of it into here. I have an experiment going, that knowing I was going to do these videos, and I wanted to show you guys, if your starter stays in the refrigerator too long, and not too long meaning you can't use it again, but you haven't touched it in quite a while, it's going to start to separate. And this dark liquid you see at the top is called hooch. It might have some alcohol content in it. I don't know the science behind it, but what I do know is that you just can stir this right back in, pull some of the starter out, feed it there on your countertop, and you're just back in business with your sourdough starter, okay? So if you're going on a prolonged vacation or what have you, and you come home and your starter has hooch at the top, don't worry, just stir it right back in and then start activating some of that starter. Okay, so here we go, you guys. I like to use the mini mix and scraper to do this because it's not metal. You want to really avoid any metal with the sourdough starter. I have a funny story. One of my friends' dads, here I'm going to add 50 grams, you guys. One of my friends' dads, I won't say any names, but she'll know when she hears this story, was courting his, or dating, however, his wife at the time. And this is probably 60 years ago. And he was very proud of his sourdough starter. Now look at how little is in there, you guys. Okay, that is so little, right? But I don't want it to be too high because I don't want a bunch of discard, right? If I make more than the 150 grams I told you about, I'm going to end up with a lot of discard when I go to make my my bread here in a couple days, or tomorrow actually. And so that's not very much, right? It doesn't take much. It's 100 grams total for a loaf of bread. So there's that. Now I'm going to add my unbleached bread flour. Anyway, so back to that story, tear that. And I'm not exactly precise if it's 52 grams. I think that's okay. That was 53. Let's see how close we can get this one. In fact, I'm going to grab a spoon real quick, you guys. So the girlfriend walks into his place and she's like, "What is that smell?" And the smell was that he left a spoon in his sourdough starter just sitting there, and it was reacting with the starter, and it gave off, I guess, a very bad stench. Well, bachelors don't notice that kind of thing, right? So anyway, long story short, avoid using metal, okay? You want to use glass or plastic containers. I'll talk more about that on my next video of the ones that I use and like. And again, the small batter bowl is really nice when you're getting started or if you have a lot of baking to do. And then, so now, see, look, not very much again, right? It's not that much. So now I'm going to tear it and add my 50 grams of water. Now, this does not have to be precise, you guys, but here's what I did learn. And that is, if you're underfeeding your starter consistently, you're going to find that your bread is gummy. So you don't want to underfeed it. And when you underfeed it, you'll start to notice a chemical smell to it, kind of like acetone or fingernail polish remover. Not very much again, right? Now I'm going to stir it up. I'll show you the consistency. And so you definitely want to keep that 1 to 1 ratio. And you can eyeball that good enough. And if you're uncertain, but you don't want to drag your scale out and all that, err on the side of giving it more flour than you see starter in the container. Now, what do you do if your starter's just not really active or it's starting to just not produce the bread you want? I like to give it a super feeding. And that is heighten those ratios. 1 part starter to say 2 or 3. I've done up to 5. I had an issue this last January where my bread was gummy. Well, I was underfeeding my starter. So I did 1 part starter, 5 parts flour. You can even give it a boost with just 2 parts flour. And then again, 2 parts water or whatever the ratio with the flour. Now, this is the consistency you're after. It's like a really thick, it's not quite a dough, but it's thicker than what you would, not a pourable batter, but that's what you want. And so then you want to kind of just scrape down the sides, and there it is. There's my starter. Get that off here. If you've messed with starter already, you know that when it dries, it's like plaster. So now that's going to sit on my counter. This is going to at least double, probably triple. My starter is super active. I started it from scratch using the directions on the King Arthur Flour website for starting a starter. All you need is filtered water and a good unbleached bread flour, or you actually start it with a richer flour like rye or a whole wheat flour, and then you gradually can start using the bread flour if you like. At any rate, it's going to double or triple in here. And so if you are starting with your starter halfway already and you're adding flour and adding your water, you're going to have a lava flow out of the jar. So be mindful of that. When I go to feed this, if I didn't make bread tomorrow, you feed it every day, once a day, on your countertop. And if I go to make bread tomorrow, let's say I miss a day tomorrow, I'm gonna wanna pour off some of that starter into my discard jar, right? So that's how you maintain a starter. It's super easy. Don't be freaked out by it. And just know that if you're not gonna bake bread regularly, like if you just are gonna bake bread when you feel like it, keep your starter in the refrigerator and then just pull it out a day or two, feed it a couple times before you get ready to bake. This will take about 4 to 6 hours, sometimes shorter amount of time if it's warmer in the kitchen, to completely rise. When I know it's ready to bake, so it's gonna rise, and it's kind of have a domed surface. Once that dome flattens out and it's really bubbly, that's when it's the best time to bake. As it's still growing and kind of dome shaped, that I let it continue to rise until it's flattened out. I don't want it to flatten out and then sink, because that's what it'll do if you don't pull any out. I just want it to be at its height, but flat and bubbly. And you'll see the bubbles all around the bottom and sides of the jar as well. That's when it's time to make your dough. And that's when I will see you next time. Thank you.